Welcome to She Moves Bravely, a podcast dedicated to empowering women through stories of resilience, courage, and success. I'm your host, Shantae Dent. Today, I have the honor of introducing you to a woman who moves bravely, and her name is Lisa Tickel. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. And I know I've said this before, but I just love the name of this podcast. It pretty much says everything.
She moves bravely. That's what
She
we're
moves
doing.
bravely.
Yes. Thank you so much, Lisa. Well, the honor that I have of inviting Lisa to the show today is I was honored to be a guest on Lisa's podcast, Healing and Growing Hand in Hand, which was an incredible experience. I highly value the depth of our connection, and I genuinely felt like it would not be right if I did not ask Lisa to show up on the She Moves Bravely podcast and share her insight, a bit of her journey. So, Lisa, let's dive right in. Tell us about you, your journey. You know how this flows. What have you overcome? Yeah. How did you overcome it? And what are you doing today?
So mine is a very long journey. So I had childhood abuse from as far back as I can remember. That little picture back there of me is probably when it started. And it was my parents and my brother, mostly my brother at first. And it was all abuses except for, fortunately, sexual abuse. I didn't experience that, but everything else I did. The biggest thing was abandonment. That was a big one for me. And that one carried into my adult life for many years. So that went on, and it seemed to intensify around the age of 12 or 13. And what ended up happening, and I share this with the listeners because when I think back to it, it just amazes me that I had no clue. But I started putting weight on because I started my emotional eating. That's when I started when I was 12. And that triggered my mother. And, I was this pretty little girl that she loved to dress up. And I mean, Easter time was a big deal. I got a whole new outfit, a hat and everything. And all of a sudden I'm putting weight on and I'm not so cute anymore. And so she got pretty abusive with that. There was a lot of, you need to quit eating. I didn't understand why I was putting weight on. So how am I going to understand how to take it off? So that went on for a couple of years. And then when I got into high school, I lost my mom when I was 16 to cancer. I was really young. And that, losing a parent or losing a sibling is traumatic, but the way that it was done was even more traumatic because I didn't know she was dying. And so that whole thing was traumatic. And that, my dad, who is a man of fear, a lot of fear, and would hide a lot, really shut down after he lost his sweetheart, as he put it. And so all of that kind of took me into my adult life with a lot of negative thinking, a lot of self-sabotage. I was in complete survival mode. And, the thing I'll say about when you're in survival mode is you'll do things in survival mode you wouldn't do outside of survival mode. And, I was just trying to get through to the next minute by minute. And the thing that the belief that I took in that really affected a big part of my life is when I was about 11, my brother had told me that nobody liked me. Right. And I believed him. I just remember like he was right. Like I believed him and I just remember being heartbroken. And so I took that belief into my adult life. And what it caused me to do is my first husband, I married him because I really believed he was the only man on the face of the earth that was going to like me, love me, want to be with me. And I'm not saying anything negative against him. We were both in kind of the same place. And so it wasn't a healthy marriage for almost 30 years. We were together for a long time. Yeah. And I did some growing. I remember at 19, knowing that there was something wrong with me. I didn't feel broken, and I've never used that term that I was broken, but I knew something wasn't right. And what I didn't realize at the time is I didn't like the pain I was feeling. And so I started my healing journey, and I started with my Bible. Like I literally started with my Bible. And I was on a hunt for a long time to try to get this thing in me changed. And it was over the last probably 13, 15 years that I've really done a lot of growth. And I think there's a few reasons for that. One, I did get out of my marriage, and that was a big getting out of that marriage and getting out of that unhealthy environment and getting me away from it and me focusing on me. And the other thing is there's so much more out there now to help people than there was then. I couldn't always afford therapy then, but now there's just so much more. There's books, there's podcasts, there's a lot of stuff out there to help. And so I've kind of pulled those pieces together that helped me. And one of the biggest things for me over the last 7 years that's really helped in my healing is having a voice. I didn't have a voice. I didn't have a voice for the longest time. And what I realized, this is really funny. The other day, I realized not only did I get a voice, but I can articulate now where I couldn't articulate things quite the same. I can tell you now, this is what's interesting. I can tell you what's going on in my head and what I'm thinking now, where before it didn't connect and I couldn't tell you. It's the strangest thing. I could think it, but I couldn't say it.
Couldn't say it. Yeah.
So in all that, I felt like I needed to have a way to make beauty from ashes in my life. And it really bothered me that I didn't have help like I needed. It wasn't out there. And I wanted to be able to help shorten someone else's pain. And so one of the things I did before I started doing my podcast is for 8 years, I co-facilitated a childhood abuse healing workshop for women. And it was incredibly powerful and incredibly healing for me as well. And I had the honor and privilege of helping so many women begin their healing journey or continue their healing journey. And you cannot pay me enough money for that feeling. That is just amazing to watch women begin to heal from all walks of life, some of the most tragic things happening to them. And yet they were able to get done with the workshop and have hope. So I saw that and I'm like, okay, I got to do more with that. And so what I decided to do was create the podcast that I now have. And it really serves three purposes. One, it gives voice to other women to be able to, and men, it's not just women. Let me say that again. It's for men and women to have a voice, share their story of healing. And then the second thing is to bring on experts to help us navigate this trauma, childhood abuse, and all the nuances that come with it. And then the third thing, which is really interesting, is shining a light on areas where there's abuse, where people either don't realize it or don't understand the depth of it.
Nice. Now, that's definitely a reason to start a podcast. Lisa, you touched on many points. And as with all guests, when I'm listening and taking in the details of a story, it plays in my mind on this movie screen. And the initial visual that came to mind was the little Lisa, who was dressed all purdy. Mama had Lisa so cute, just the little darling. And how often do we see that in many children? But sadly, behind closed doors, there's nothing cute or darling happening. And I think about when you talk about just various forms of childhood trauma, how children in that vulnerable, innocent state do their absolute best to cope and make sense of what's happening behind closed doors, knowing that the dots aren't connecting, this doesn't make sense. But when we look at the statistics, are able to initially say, this isn't right, and I need to talk about it, and I need to report it. Most children will hold it in, will suppress, give in to different threats or various forms of grooming, manipulation. The list goes on. Sadly, the list goes on.
So often it's, and I can think back to my own experiences and, watching children being interviewed, they know something's not right.
Yeah.
They know there's a little check in their heart that something isn't right, but their little minds, that we as adults have a hard time wrapping our head around this, right? So imagine an innocent little child, trying to figure this out in without any experience in their life.
Yeah. And I like how you mentioned about the reason for the podcast, one of the three reasons, is to shed light on experiences that occurred during childhood, and haven't even we don't fully understand how that affected us, in our
Right.
adulthood. And why is it that, here's a point you made, and I can attest to this, where I think about it, but I can't say it, I can't articulate it. And that's some kind of stronghold right there. That's a heavy level of bondage, where there's so much we want to express. And unfortunately, because of the trauma, the way we've been trained to think, we're not able to verbalize what we're feeling and what we're experiencing. And that is a type of pain that I identify individuals who are suffering in silence. There's so
Hmm.
much to be released, revealed, but they can't quite let it out. How do I verbalize this? And this is the power of
Yeah.
the podcast and the power of the conversations, because the listeners are hearing points that they can normalize and say, "Oh, I feel the
Yes.
same way, Lisa. Okay, now what do I do about that? How do I get through that?" Now, you talked about the Bible, which is my go-to. That's my number.
Hmm.
Can you provide any insight, specific insight, on steps that you took to begin this journey of articulating and expressing all that was suppressed? Having that voice again.
It's really interesting because I didn't even realize it until probably about 7 or 8 years ago. And I was in the car with my current husband, and we were just having a normal conversation. And I turned to him, and I was going to respond to something that he said, and it wouldn't come out. It literally, and he's just looking at me, he's going, "Say it." And I'm like, "It won't come out." And he's like, okay, well, we'll just give it time. And what he did, what my husband did, and this is what I think the key was for me, is for the first time in my life, I had a safe space outside of therapy. But even in therapy, I couldn't talk. And so just his reaction, because I can remember thinking, if I say this thing to him, and it wasn't anything bad, but if I say this thing to him, he's going to pull over and tell me to get out of the car, because that was the root of it. Is when I did have a voice, I was humiliated, I was hurt. And so I learned, don't say anything. And so if it was a little trigger in me, it was shut down. So it was interesting because he's like, "Well, okay, we'll give time." And I remember the first time that I tested him, that I actually was able to say what I wanted to say and watch his reaction. And he was like completely normal. He didn't run away. He didn't, shame me. He hugged me like it was okay. And so with time, it just took time, and it is still. And here's what happened recently. This is really, really crazy. And I've never experienced anything like this. So we don't fight. If we have a disagreement, we always have a discussion. And there was something we were disagreeing on, and I needed a minute. I'm really good about that, of saying, I just need a minute. And I walked back to the bathroom. I think I was brushing my teeth and stuff. And all of a sudden I felt my entire throat tighten up, and it hurt so bad. It ached. It was the most bizarre feeling. It was like my entire throat. And I'm like, what is this? And I had already solidified in my head how I was going to respond to him. I already had worked out what I was going to say. And it was after I realized what I was going to say that I realized my throat was hurting. I needed to walk right out there immediately. And I did. I walked out and I said, "Okay, I'm ready to talk." He's like, "Okay." And I said it. And as soon as I started saying it, that pain went away.
Yes, yes.
That was so bizarre.
That's bizarre, but it's also powerful. It goes to speak of that unseen realm that is real, that exists. Body memories, your body keeping the
Yeah.
score. Like, you mentally might have been in this space of, years have gone by, you've gone into the therapy, you've been in this position to serve other women and help them recover. Yet, because of your history, any type of triggering experience, that's causing your body to want to revert to the norm and react
Correct.
the way you've always responded or reacted.
Mm-hmm.
Well, definitely excited and rejoicing with you that you pressed through that. And I'm also, again, just pleading to that listener who is where you were. It's like, that's where they are today. I am thinking about, oh gosh, and I hear what you're talking about, how it kind of naturally unfolded. And what I take away from that is, listeners, take the step, like start the journey. Because even if we give you, well, step one, journal, step two, talk about it,
Right.
step three, meet with a therapist, there are still going to be areas that will unfold in a unique manner, specific
Mm-hmm.
to you, your personality, your disposition, and your experience. What I feel is extremely important to focus on is normalizing when those experiences manifest. We're not crazy.
Yes. Yes.
It's a part of that healing process, because
Mm-hmm.
you are going to want to revert back to how it's always been, even if it's not healthy.
Right.
And so I love, Lisa, again, that you pressed through that experience. I think about, again, and it is something it's hard to shake about these individuals who are suffering in silence, because
Mm-hmm.
they feel as if they do not have a voice. And this might be,
Yeah.
particularly to individuals who experience trauma, during childhood, because that's where a lot of those unhealthy habits begin to formulate
Right. It's techniques that they learn in that moment
in that
to get
moment.
through that moment, to
Mm,
survive that moment that they're going through. And in their little mind, it's like, ooh, that worked. And so they keep doing that, but it doesn't work later on.
does not. No, it does not. So when we think about encouraging our listeners, Lisa, what would you say to that person who feels as if they do not have a voice? They've already identified, yes, there were some childhood traumas that I've experienced. I don't know where to go from here. I'm ready to take a step. What step should I take? What would you say to that listener, Lisa?
So with trauma, was one of the things that's really important. If you are going to get into any kind of therapy, it's really important that you get into trauma therapy, because traditional trauma, or excuse me, traditional therapy is not going to dive into what you need to do, and get into and deal with all the stuff that goes on with trauma, because it is very unique.
Mhm.
But creating a safe space, and the one thing I say for me, and I've had several of my guests agree with me, is that we need to get this stuff out of our head, right? So we sit and we think and we think and we think and we think and we think. And that's a lot of times what causes us to paralyze, because that's what'll trigger the stuff in our body too, right?
Mm.
And I always say, get it out. And if you don't feel like you have a voice right now, and I know journaling gets overused, but journaling, write down what's in your head. Write it out. It may not even make any sense. Don't put any filters on it. Just start writing. Get it out. That alone is going to help take kind of the pressure off, right? And finding a safe place. And a safe place, it can be a husband, it can be a wife, it can be a partner, it can be a friend. Therapy, I would say the best is in therapy, just because that therapist is going to know how to deal with that situation. But creating a safe space to where you can have a voice. For me, it physically wasn't getting out. So my first thing was, of course, recognizing that. And you're saying, okay, the listeners now are recognizing that they don't have a voice. And so you just start small. It just starts small, whatever that is. If you do have a person you can go to and you can start saying things, sharing with them. If you don't, and you don't have a therapist, I would say start writing, because I was able to write. Writing was not a big problem for me. It actually helped me.
I love that, Lisa. And I ask this question because I think about, and perhaps you can attest to this when you helped women heal from trauma. I think about all of the incredible women that we come in contact with, and they
Yeah.
are successful in many areas of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
But there's those silent battles that they are not sure in terms of, how do I tackle it? How do I overcome? And
Yep. Yep.
those are the scenarios that really break my heart, where I'm thinking, you are a phenomenal woman,
Mm,
but you're not giving the attention, you're not giving yourself the attention that you need. That little girl, that child who's wounded, she's an adult right now, like externally, but internally there's so many unresolved issues And so I am hoping that our listeners will take heed to this advice from Lisa and enjoy the rest of your life, even if you
Yes.
have reached like monetary success, or if you feel, again, externally all is well. But could you take a moment to self evaluate? And if you're honest and say, internally, Lisa, Shante, yeah, I think it's time. So we're urging you and encouraging you, as we always do, to move bravely. And I like what you talked about, Lisa, taking like that one step. We don't have to dive in and have it all figured out. A lot of times that can be re-traumatizing in and of
Oh,
itself.
definitely.
Take one step closer to that space of healing and restoration.
It's baby steps. I mean, it really is a journey.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not completely healed, and for me, I don't believe I'm going to be healed until I take my last breath. I'm going to be on this healing journey, but it does get better. It does. I mean, I'm living a life now that I never thought I would live. I never, it was in my dreams, but I never thought that I would actually get there. And it's been a long road. It's not always easy, but I'll tell you, as soon as you really dive in and you start healing and you start tasting that freedom, and right, you know what I'm talking
Yeah.
about.
Yes.
That is a motivator. And
Yes.
the first time I tasted that, that is what made me hungry for more.
Mm-hmm.
And my healing has been done with different modalities too. There's not one particular thing
Mm-hmm.
that has really helped. But yeah, it's been a journey, and I'm still on it. And you mentioned about women being these strong women and then still having these thoughts in their head. And yes, I that still happens to me.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the strongest women in my life still have those thoughts. They don't always see themselves as we see them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the beauty of this journey and this process is possessing the right tools.
Correct.
As you mentioned, until we get to this place of perfection, which from my perspective is heaven, we
Yes.
will always have something in our imperfect human nature that we need to work through or overcome. But what I've come to find to be the most beneficial is when we are equipped with the proper tools, we
Mm-hmm.
don't remain stuck or paralyzed in the pain or in the thoughts or overwhelmed because yes, I remember. And I have the right tools, the proper tools, the healthy tools to implement so I can continue to move forward and continue to experience levels of success in
Mm-hmm.
every area of my life.
Correct.
And so for again, that person who has all of their stuff together
They
externally,
look like it.
they look like it. We are encouraging you to take advantage of tools and resources that you will have on hand to implement at any given moment. And to me, that's confidence, that's worth, that's
Empowering.
value, that's empowerment. That's what it's really all about. Do you
Mm-hmm.
have the tools that you need so that you can continue to move forward, to move bravely in this beautiful life that God has
Yes.
given us all in order to fulfill a purpose, a mission, and a passion? I believe like everyone can do that well when we are fully equipped with the proper tools in our toolbox.
Exactly. And it's funny you say that, because that's what I do say on my podcast is build your toolbox.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, absolutely. And that's where we can remain hopeful and optimistic because we
Mm-hmm.
know that it doesn't matter what comes my way, I will get through it because I know that somewhere out here, I will find the proper person, the
Right.
right program, some type of resource that's going to allow me to navigate through this situation. I just have to make sure I'm open to it, that I don't shut
Right. Right.
down.
It's frightening to be in a place, and I can remember being in that place of not having the tools and being afraid and feeling like it's hopeless. I'm completely helpless. And it's very frightening. And once I started building my toolbox, that built my confidence. And I did get to the point where I've been through a lot, and I've got a toolbox, and I'll be able to get through anything.
Yeah. Lisa, I love when you talked about once you get a taste of that freedom. Once you get a taste, number one, you realize, oh, it's possible. And
Yes.
it feels so good. You're like, I never want to go back to that place of bondage. As a matter of fact, I want
Exactly.
to tell someone else how good this feels. But that truly is where we say that's where the magic happens. Like take a
Mhm.
step, just like trust us, take one step, get a taste of that goodness, that level of freedom, and you'll never want to go back to that place of
Yep.
paralyzed pain. And I feel like it's just something about knowing that it's possible. My
Yes.
goodness. Yeah.
That's it. That's it. All of a sudden, because that's the thing too. As soon as you see that the first time, you're like, wow, okay, I don't have to keep living like that. So it really is there. It's like evidence to your brain
Yes.
that you don't have to live that old way with those old thoughts and those, ruminating on really negative thoughts about yourself, and it's like even doing my podcast, I still sometimes, question myself, like, you know, what I have to look at is the evidence that's out there that's showing that it is making a difference. I'm
Mhm.
not popular like Mel Robbins or anything, but if I just help one person, I'm good, right? I know I'm helping more than that, but it's motivating.
It is. And Lisa, we want to help you help more individuals. So, on that note, how can our listeners get in touch with you, stay connected, and find your podcast?
Well, thank you. So you can start with my website, which is healing and growing hand in hand podcast.com. And on there, you'll be able to connect with all my different ways of watching the podcast or listening to it, which is on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. I'm on Instagram. I'm on TikTok. So on Instagram, it's Lisa M. Tickel. And on TikTok, it's Lisa Tickel, and I'm on LinkedIn as well. So I'm on some of the social media, and that's the best way to get a hold of me.
Lovely. We will include Lisa's contact information in our show notes. Lisa, thank you for showing up and showing us that it is possible.
And it's for everybody, everybody.